This morning, the state senator with an unpopular statement.
I like the tax break. It's too big.
Why did you vote for it?
I voted for it for two reasons. I wasn't given the choice.
State Senator Nathan Johnson on what Texas should have done with some of the billions it's giving in property tax breaks. How confident are you in the state electric grid? We've had multiple calls to conserve this summer. Republican State Rep Brian Harrison says his colleagues in the legislature missed an opportunity to fix it this year. Texas eliminated DEI from the state payroll. Minority and women-owned businesses might be next. That is a concern from Cheryl McKissick, a high-powered CEO speaking in Texas next month. And you will need a ticket to see the Paxton impeachment trial in person. The start of it now less than 10 days away.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning. Right now, we are 9 days away from the historic impeachment trial of the suspended Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. The biggest development this weekend, Ken Paxton might be called to the witness stand. The Dallas Morning News reporting this. It's still unclear, though, whether he could be forced to testify. If you want to watch the trial in person, you'll need to have tickets to the Senate gallery. These tickets are free, but they are first come, first served. Every morning at 7:30, right outside the chamber doors. Doors to the Senate gallery open at 8 a.m. And then Paxton's lead defense attorney in the news for something else besides the impeachment. Tony Busby is trying again to get into politics himself. He announced he will run for a city council seat in Houston. Busby has run for office there several times unsuccessfully before. He dropped this news 2 weeks before the impeachment trial is supposed to begin. Now to the headlines. Huge news on Friday. Republicans announcing their 2028 national political convention will happen in Houston, the first time it has been there since 1992. Former Governor Rick Perry is slamming Texas Republicans who are working to delegitimize the Paxton impeachment. Perry laid it all out in an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal Thursday evening. The former Texas governor said Republicans used to believe in the rule of law. His closing line might be the strongest. Perry wrote that Texans can show the rest of the country that the rule of law applies to both political parties. Governor Greg Abbott on the defense again over his program to bus migrants to other states. One of Abbott's buses drove into Los Angeles last week just as the unprecedented tropical storm was washing over Southern California. LA's mayor called Abbott evil for sending migrants into harm's way. Abbott's office said the driver that did use caution to get there. And we are waiting to see what a federal judge in Austin says about the buoys on the Rio Grande there in Eagle Pass. Judge David Ezra said his decision will be coming shortly. The state had already had heavy machinery moving Governor Abbott's buoys closer to the Texas shoreline a few days ago. Abbott floated them to prevent migrants from crossing in Eagle Pass, but several asylum seekers have died. Federal government suing to remove the buoys, arguing the Rio Grande is an international body of water subject to treaties, not state law. Now to what might be an unpopular statement by a state lawmaker. We watched property tax relief become reality finally this summer at the state legislature. So cuts are coming to those big bills we pay every year. Who isn't excited about that, right? Well, one state senator, hear him out though on this. He voted for it, but looking back, he now says maybe Texas could have done some more things with that $18 billion it spent to reduce what we pay. Here's State Senator Nathan Johnson, a Democrat from Dallas. Senator, first of all, thanks for coming back on the program.
Glad to be here in person.
Absolutely. Secondly, everyone I know is so excited about these property tax reductions this year. You write an op-ed pouring cold water on it. What kind of reaction have you had?
Generally, people are thanking me for telling the truth about the process. I'm excited about a tax break. My taxes are going to go down. The op-ed that I wrote was really about process, that the process of arriving at how we're doing all this was not a good political process, and that the number we arrived at was excessive.
It's the $18 billion.
Yeah, it's too much frosting on the cupcake, Jason.
And you talked about how you guys arrived at that, how the lawmakers in the Senate arrived at that. If not $18 billion, what should the number have been?
You know, Jason, nobody did an analysis. I didn't do a fiscal analysis, but I think the number, personally, I think it should have been less. Property taxes are very high in Texas. They are burdensome. They are causing strain on people and businesses, and I voted for the bill because I wanted them to come down. But a more reasonable number might have been $10 billion instead of 18. With that difference of $8 billion, we still would receive a very large tax break. I mean, maybe 12, maybe 8, pick a number. But the things that we didn't talk about are what could we do with that additional money? Could we have a couple $1 billion to build more affordable housing in Texas, to incentivize the private sector to build housing? Could we have another couple of billion for our aging water infrastructure? Could we have put more money into the grid? Because the grid money is going to come out over 4 years instead of 2. There's countless things we could have done with this money other than give ourselves an even bigger property tax break. I like the tax break. It's too big.
Why did you vote for it then?
I voted for two reasons. I wasn't given the choice to vote for the right size bill, right? It's either property tax reduction or no property tax reduction. And in principle, I support the whole thing. Secondly, that choice is now going to go to the voters. And I wrote the op-ed because I want us all to be thinking about it. There's time to have this conversation, and we're going to go forward with it, aware of the consequences, aware of the implications, or we're not. But it's something that we need to look at honestly as a state.
It does go before the voters in November. Do you think it will pass? Should it pass?
I do think it will pass. As to whether it should pass, let's just let the conversation play out a little bit longer. There are a lot of good things in this bill, a lot of good things for people, even good things in some ways for public education, good things for businesses, but it is excessive and it is going to create obligations in the future, which might mean either in the future there could be tax increases, which no one likes, or there could be cuts to services, or in a good case scenario, and I'm an optimist, the economy is doing great and we can still pay for it, but we will still have to put that money towards continuous property tax breaks instead of perhaps to major investments this state needs in physical and social infrastructure. I think we'll be okay. But we might have to call on the rainy day fund. We might have to hope that sales tax revenues are really, really high, or we might have to face some tough decisions.
Tough decisions like layoffs in education? What do you think?
Well, I don't think so. I'm not going to fire a teacher because we run out of money based on giving ourselves a tax break. We have a very large economic stabilization fund, also known as the rainy day fund. I'm one of those people who thinks that's a good idea because I'm willing to spend it at times we need it. No, we're not going to lay off a teacher, and if anybody votes for this bill, I want all of us to commit to continuing to fund our schools at the levels at least where they are right now. Frankly, I think they need to go higher.
The other big issue that the Senate has coming up is the impeachment trial. How close is that vote going to be at the end of the day, do you think?
I have no idea, Jason. I believe in the process. Every senator has sworn to use impartial judgment in that, which is difficult because this is a political process. But we do have a constitutional duty to be impartial. There is a trial. There will be evidence and argument offered by both sides. And it could be overwhelmingly one way or the other way. And I take very seriously the responsibility to walk in there unbiased, and I believe that my colleagues do as well.
Based on the evidence that's already been out there by the House prosecutors, do you think Paxton survives this?
Oh, I have. Listen, I'm a juror. I'm a member of the court. I'm not going to make predictions. I'm going to do my constitutional duty to look at the evidence and take the arguments and make a judgment on an impartial basis. And I hope my colleagues and expect my colleagues will too.
Senator, thank you for the time.
Coming up, is Texas becoming California? Calls to conserve electricity are a sign of what lawmakers did not do. So says State Rep Brian Harrison, with us in a moment. And what gets targeted after DEI was eliminated from state payrolls? Some companies now concerned that minority and women-owned businesses could soon be cut out of contracts. Inside Texas Politics, back in a moment.
Welcome back to Inside Texas Politics here. You know, supply and demand have been tight several times this summer. The Texas electric grid, ERCOT has always kept the lights on, but what kind of confidence does all these appeals have for us in the grid? State Rep Brian Harrison says the legislature missed opportunities to do more to the grid this year. He is a Republican from Ellis County who spoke to us on a business trip in Nashville. Representative Harrison, thanks for being on the program again here with us. As we do this interview here, we are now in a conservation appeal from ERCOT. You mentioned on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days, is this Texas or California that we're in right now?
Well, it's the first thing that popped into my mind. when I get these notices from ERCOT. I mean, California became famous for their rolling blackouts. And here we are in the great state of Texas, in God's country, in what is perhaps the most energy-rich patch of dirt on this planet that we call Earth. And every time it gets really hot or really cold these days, we are now in a situation where you have to wonder if the lights are going to be able to stay on, if you're going to be able to heat your home, or days like today, if you're going to be able to cool your home. And I'm just sorry. The legislature in the state of Texas has got to do more and take bolder action to let markets work and get us off of our dependence on these unreliable, heavily subsidized energy sources that are leading to this. This isn't happening because of traditional dispatchable energy sources. This is happening because of unreliable, heavily subsidized wind and solar.
Well, wind and solar, as you know, is helping to keep the lights on, providing about 30% normally of what we use every day. Is there something the legislature should have done this year or could still do if the governor calls a special session?
Yeah, two things on that. I mean, I hear this all the time. Well, wind and solar are the only thing keeping the lights on. Well, that's just not true. If you look at the numbers in aggregate, when it's on, when it's off, and what percentage of their potential output they're putting out. When we're needing them the most, they're in the single digits of their capacity. Okay, and the only reason, by the way, even if that were true, which it's not, but even if that were true, it's only because we haven't added more of the cheap, abundant, reliable, dispatchable sources like natural gas. I mean, nobody's out there saying that wind and solar is producing zero, but also, why in the world does the state of Texas allow unelected bureaucrats to hold so much power on how we're orienting our energy market? The state legislature has outsourced the responsibility for setting a reliability standard to unelected bureaucrats at the PUC. We don't right now have a reliability standard. We should have the basic common sense approach. I filed a bill to do exactly this, by the way, which is to say, hey, if you're going to supply the grid, you've got to demonstrate reliability.
In ERCOT's defense, ERCOT has set a lot of new records this summer and hasn't turned the lights off once. But you still think the grid seems shaky?
Well, I think anybody who's looked at their emails or Twitter today from ERCOT know for a fact that it's shaky. And look, I'm very glad that it hasn't completely come to a stop. But we have been incredibly close. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning. We are blessed beyond blessings to live in the most energy-rich patch of dirt on planet Earth. We should be not able to just supply ourselves. We should be able to supply the country and, quite frankly, a good percentage of the world if we could get the regulatory boot off of our producers and stop and fight back against these market distorting subsidies for unreliable wind and solar.
Representative, thank you for the time.
Great to be with you, Jason.
Texas lawmakers have eliminated DEI on state payrolls. There is concern right now, though, in private business that minority and women-owned companies might be targeted next, maybe cut out of lucrative public contracts. Cheryl McKissick-Daniel runs one of the largest design and construction firms in the country, and she is the keynote speaker at the Women's Leadership Summit in Dallas next month. Cheryl, thanks for being on the program with us. Governments like Texas have banned DEI on all state payrolls here. Are these type of programs history, do you think, or is there a place for them in private industry and elsewhere?
I hope it's not that they are history. I mean, we have fought many, many years to put these programs in place. They've been extremely effective in opening up doors for all people in America, just not for a few. And I think that's important for innovation and creativity and all that we need as a nation going forward.
Considering what we're watching, I'm curious what you think this apparent backlash to hiring based on race is going to mean to minority and women-owned business enterprises.
Well, I think that's the next step. First is the colleges and universities as far as, the number of students or slots that have been allotted for people of color. I think the next step will go straight to the heart of the economics around people of color, meaning the MWBE programs, the DBE programs, the small business programs. I believe all are at risk at this point with the latest developments that's happened in the states. I know nationally there are several organizations who have come together, who have hired constitutional attorneys to help advise on what the next step should be to protect a number of these programs that are currently in place that provide, quite frankly, economic empowerment and equality to firms that are owned by people of color and women.
Cheryl, you have encouraged more women, especially women of color, to get into the construction industry as a viable career, at least consider it as a viable career. A lot of folks, and again, this may be stereotypical, just don't put women in construction together. What kind of reaction and response have you had for that over the years?
Well, I think people look at construction as construction boots, bricks and mortar, out mixing concrete and, putting up steel beams. But construction is much more sophisticated. There is a whole consulting service side to the business. Construction is probably one of the largest industries in America. And there's soft skills that are required as well. Not to say that we don't have women on the construction sites, actually, as electricians and carpenters, we do, and laborers. But there's also a need for project managers, superintendents. And so there's a various number of jobs that women, quite frankly, are very good at doing, paying attention to detail. And I'd like to see more women in this role because, quite frankly, Jason, it builds wealth. And wealth is what's important for, families today, especially when you have both members of the family, if it's, husband and wife or, two partners. It requires the income for both to raise a family today.
Cheryl, congratulations on your successes too. We appreciate the time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
The Republican debate last week was only the second time in 40 years that a Texan did not show up on stage, but there was plenty of talk about the border. So what caught the ear of Texans? We'll talk about it in the roundtable next. Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ashley Godot is with us this week. She is an anchor and the managing editor of political content at KVUE News in Austin. Bud Kennedy is a columnist at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Bernadine Steptoe, of course, is political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Bud, let's start with you. The Paxton impeachment trial now 9 days away. Tickets are going to be available for the general public. Of course, we're all interested in this. How much do you think the public will be watching?
I think the public will be interested to start. You have to get there early. I'd get there, about 7 o'clock. They start giving out tickets at 7:30, and they're giving out tickets 45 minutes before the afternoon session. There's some weird deal of if you leave, you have to hold your ticket in order to get back in. And it sounds like boarding a Southwest flight or something. I don't know how it's going to work.
Ashley, the other big news out this week, too, was about a potential witness list that was floated. The Dallas Morning News floated that. And on there is Ken Paxton's name, and there's question about whether he can actually testify.
Well, I think that he's who we all want to hear from. He's certainly who the senators, I think, are going to want to hear from. This is about him. And, will he be compelled to take the stand is the big question. He obviously does not want to. His attorneys have made it very clear. They have talked about it. They have filed motions about it. They don't want him to have to take questions from the House Board of Managers attorneys. So I think it's one of those things we just kind of have to wait and see. But it's no surprise, in my opinion, that he's on the list. Of course he's on the list.
Yeah, he would be on the list, Bernadine, but he has a lot riding on this.
Well, yes, and why would he get on the stand? He doesn't have to, and I think that it would be detrimental to his case if he does. What defendant voluntarily gets on the stand? Because number one, you don't want them to say something that will actually help the prosecutor's case. Right. So I don't see him getting on that stand, and I don't see the prosecutors or the House managers forcing him to do it.
Or the federal investigation underway too, which is the huge deal that could result in criminal charges and maybe criminal time in prison if he is indeed convicted. But I want to ask you about the GOP debate, the very first one we saw last week. The next one's coming up next month in California. This was only the second time, as you pointed out, in 40 years a Texan hasn't been on that stage. So there was a lot of talk about the border. What was catching Texans' ears, do you think? Yeah,
it was amazing to see a whole Republican. I started thinking, back, Ted Cruz, the Bushes, Phil Graham ran one year, Rick Perry. There was always a Republican on stage for 40 years until last cycle. So it was odd. The border talk was interesting for Texans. You had Ron DeSantis in particular saying that he was going to send military teams into Mexico to attack the drug dealers. Pence, a little bit of saying he was going to go after the drug dealers. You don't want something that's going to cause a counterattack on the people in Texas.
Ashley, your takeaway, what was it?
I think it's just hard for these Republicans, point blank, period. And the fact of the matter is, indictments, to the side, former President Donald Trump is leading in the polls. And so I think that the candidates are just trying to say what they can to try to make themselves stand out. To your point, not a Texan, on the stage. Will Hurd did not make the cut. And so it'll be interesting to see what he does, I think, moving forward to try to make himself stand out and see if he can make it for the next round.
Yeah, whether he can qualify for that. Bernadine, final word this morning.
Well, we don't have anyone who has the stature or the money who could run for president. And Ted Cruz did wisely staying where he is. So, and then look at the candidates who are up there. Why get into that fight? So I think that'll probably be a while before Texas has a candidate.
Yeah, why tangle with them up there? And the question is whether any of them moved in the polls. And as Ashley said, it doesn't look like anyone actually moved in the polls. Guys, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Of course, the next Republican debate is going to be in Simi Valley, California at the Reagan Presidential Library coming up on September 27th. We appreciate you watching this program. Hope to see you again next Sunday where we will take you inside Texas politics. Take care.